I've been very lucky, but I'm acutely conscious of the fact that the history of politics is littered with the P45s of those who were supposed to be rising stars and ended up being shooting stars.
Under Neil Kinnock, Blair and his great friend Gordon Brown were like blood brothers. They shared a commons room. They were both modernisers, and everyone agreed that someday one of the two would be the leader. The smart money was all going on the more overtly ambitious Gordon Brown. The moment came sooner than anyone expected, with the sudden death in 1994 of Labour's new leader, John Smith. Gordon Brown and Tony Blair were now faced with an agonising decision. They had a long-standing agreement that they would never stand for the leadership against one another.
I had this real sense of personal grief, at the same time as not being able to escape the fact that there was an issue that was direct and immediate, namely, did I go for becoming leader of the Labour Party or not? So it was a very, very personally difficult situation. I think that the few weeks following his death were some of the most difficult in my entire life, probably the most difficult.
Why were they so difficult?
Because there were these, as I say, I felt this sense of grief at the loss of someone who was a close friend. There was obviously sorting out between myself and Gordon, which was, my closest political friendship, and someone who's a very close personal friend of mine as well.
How difficult was that to sort it out between you and Gordon Brown?
Well, it was difficult because we'd always anticipated that he would be the leader of the Labour Party. And yet when the time came, I think we both decided in the end it was right that I went for it, which says a lot for him, being able to recognise that himself and then help me do it.
Brown withdrew from the race and Blair became an even shorter odds-on favourite. But the events of those days left scars which have lasted until today. Blair promoted his leadership campaign in a breakfast TV interview. Among the journalists chosen to question him was one who would become a crucial figure in Tony Blair's life, the tabloid political editor, Alistair Campbell.
Do you think you were tough enough to cope with the sort of media onslaught that Neil Kinnock, for example, had to endure?
I think it comes with the territory, and I'm entirely prepared for it, indeed expect it.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome Tony Blair?
Blair won the leadership election in a landslide. At the age of 41, he was Labour's youngest ever leader. He was determined to transform the party and make Labour electable. To extend its appeal beyond its traditional supporters, he embarked on what became known as the Project. It comprised a heady mix of 4 ingredients: marketing, modernisation, God and mammon. Sometimes a number of elements would combine as the public learnt more about Blair and his wife, who were both devout Christians.
I wondered if you would tell us who you are.
Well, my name's Cherie, and I'm a mum, and I'm a barrister. In fact, I've recently been a Queen's Counsel, which is very smart. But I'm also married to this man over here.
I won't ask if it causes you any problems. I'll have that, yes. Now, this gentleman, I have seen a photograph of you. Perhaps you'd like to tell us who you are, that's all.
I'm Tony Blair, and I'm a father. I'm leader of the Labour Party. I'm not sure whether that's very smart or not. But I do have other ambitions.
Is your CV good?
Well, my CV's good, but it's got to come better in the next 2 years. Well, I never like going on about this because people think you're either trying to sort of paint God into the picture or any of the rest of it. And I mean, I am what I am. I'm a practicing Christian, and that's part of me. There's no point in denying it. But I suppose that the thing that has come out most of my politics that's derived from belief is the concept of values, that is what politics is about. And that the great task for the progressive forces was to decouple the values, which are timeless, from certain political dogma and doctrine that were in fact only relevant for one particular time, if indeed they were relevant for that time.
Socialism, for me, was never about nationalization or the power of the state, not just about economics or even politics. It is a moral purpose to life. It is how I try to live my life, how you try to live yours, the simple truths. I am worth no more than anyone else. I am my brother's keeper. I will not walk by on the other side.
As he set off on his mission to create new Labour with the help of his old friend, Blair told his key advisers that the slogan for election success could be summed up in 3 words: reassurance, reassurance, and reassurance.
What are the directions? You've got them actually in your bag.
Blair sought to woo the Tory press and convince the public that his party had dropped its scary socialist beliefs and was headed in a new direction.
Okay.
You come up to the junction, Peter, and then you go right, and then go right again.
You've got to get, basically, you're going to go to the Spennymoor town centre.
He also wanted to convert big business to the new Labour cause.
It was important, first of all, to disabuse people of the notion that there was some rampant anti-business old Labour under the new Labour guise. That was important in itself. It was important for me to learn. And it was also important for me to try and explain to people what the nature of my political project was about. This idea that we could get beyond the traditional boundaries of left and right, and that you could have a pro-business, pro-enterprise, but pro-fairness political party, that it was possible to do this.
And at the time of the next election, there will be just 1,000 days until the new millennium. 1,000 days to prepare for 1,000 years.
Blair flew down to London on the morning after the election, knowing that he was about to become the youngest Prime Minister in nearly 2 centuries.
In a very curious way, the election night for me passed in a rather strange way, lacking in celebration. I didn't feel this great sense of celebration. I switched in my own mind then to thinking, what am I going to do? What are the things I need to do next?
Blair had led his party to its biggest ever election victory. He was taking power in bright sunshine, with public hopes as high as the new government's majority. Labour's formidable election campaign machine had carefully choreographed the new First Family's arrival at number 10.
I mean, I was aware of the fact this was the beginning of the journey, not the end of it. And it was going to put a lot of pressure on us and on the family. We both understood that.
Jim Callaghan said that when he first walked into the cabinet room, it was almost like a religious experience, realising that the future direction of the nation was in your hands, and as Roy Jenkins said, you're the latest in an unbroken line of apostolic succession that goes back to Walpole.
Yeah, well, that's true, and no, there is a great sense of humility and responsibility, and I think probably everybody who becomes Prime Minister feels that.
As he walked inside number 10 for only the second time in his life, the second stage of the Blair project began. His political luck had held. He was the first ever Labour Prime Minister to inherit a strong economy, and he planned to start a programme of radical reforms, first by taking on the civil service and transforming the traditional way that British governments did their business.
As for government, well, it beats the hell out of opposition, I can tell you that. They really do say, yes, Prime Minister. In fact, you have to learn, well, not the cabinet, obviously, but you have to learn a whole new language. You see, they're not, frankly, in the habit of calling anything a good idea, which, given the last 18 years, is hardly surprising. But when they describe a proposal as ambitious, or even worse, interesting, what they really mean is they think it was a stupid idea dreamed up at the last minute for your manifesto. When they describe it as challenging, they mean there's not a hope in hell of it making it work. And most of all, when they say a policy is really a very brave proposal, Prime Minister, it sort of means they've got the doctors waiting outside to sign the certificate.
The single most difficult thing about government is getting from the stage of having an idea to pushing it right throughout the system. And that is the single most difficult part of the job, and you have to keep on it the whole time. So I spend an awful lot of my time on, policy questions, working out whether, for example, whether it's an area like education or law and order or health, that we have the right structure of policy in place, that even though it may take time to deliver, you're sure that you've got the right structure in place that can deliver. I think these are very, very important parts of it.
And why do you think it is that is the most difficult part of the job, being able to go from the idea that you have to seeing it through to fruition?
Because I just think that it is in the nature of things that change is difficult and takes time. And what you find, I found this as leader of the Labour Party, is that people could always give you 1,000 reasons why something shouldn't be changed, and they found it hard to give you one reason why it should. And in the end, you've got to be the person that pushes that process of change on.
To shake up the civil service, Blair had brought with him into Number 10 his own Chief of Staff. Jonathan Powell, like Alistair Campbell, had been with Blair since the start of the Blair Project. Powell is a former high-flying diplomat, and in opposition he'd revealed that Tony Blair planned to introduce what he called a Napoleonic system into Whitehall. Number 10 would exercise much tighter control over departments than had ever been seen before. This presented a challenge to Whitehall's top mandarin, Sir Richard Wilson, the new Cabinet Secretary. His traditional role is to look after the interests of all government departments, rather than just those of the Prime Minister.
It's not that I want everything done via me, but we have a programme. It's my job as Prime Minister to deliver it. And so inevitably, if you don't have a strong centre and you're not keeping focused on what's happening in departments, then you're not running the government properly. But I think there's a dichotomy here that is false, really, because most ministers want the support of the centre in driving their programme through. But the idea that I sort of, for example, in education or in health or in the Treasury, just sort of issue edicts or diktats from here that others carry out, I think is absurd. I doubt that very much. I think most Prime Ministers got a strong programme, end up expecting their Secretaries of State to push it through. And you've always got a pretty direct personal relationships. As Prime Minister, you just appoint the cabinet ministers. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know about this. I've got a feeling with this thing that if you have a strong idea of what you want to do and believe in pushing it through, then you're in inverted commas, dictator. And if you're not, then you're weak. And he pays your money and he takes your choice on that one. But I don't feel myself. I mean, this idea that we don't, that I don't discuss things with ministers or any of the rest of it, it's just not true. I think, for example, and people often say in relation to cabinet government, look, I would be pretty shocked if the first time I knew a cabinet minister felt strongly about something was if they raised it at the cabinet table. I would expect them to come and knock on my door and say, look, Tony, I've got a problem here. I disagree with this or disagree with that. And that happens from time to time, and people do that. And then you sit down and you work it out. But, the old days of Labour governments where I think the meetings occasionally went on for 2 days and you had a show of hands at the end of it. Well, I shudder to think what would be happening if we were running it like